Good afternoon and welcome. Today's hearing is designed to raise awareness about a very real issue and to hear from government agencies responsible for our national security, as well as our visa policy, our vetting of foreign nationals, about policies and procedures that are in place to address these concerns. Recently, I spoke on the floor of the Senate and in committee about my concerns of China's aggressive plan to surpass the United States on all fronts, economically, militarily, and certainly technologically. Through its Made in China 2025 strategy, China is accelerating its efforts to acquire U.S. intellectual property and sensitive research and is using any means necessary to achieve these goals. This last February, FBI Director Wray testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee about the security risk posed by Chinese students and visiting scholars studying, researching, or teaching at American colleges and universities. Director Wray's remarks were brief, and because of the sensitive and classified nature of some parts of this issue, he could not provide the full context or breadth of the concerns in an open setting. And certainly we will respect those distinctions here as well, what we can talk about publicly and what we can need to be talked about only in a classified setting. Most students and visiting scholars come to the United States for legitimate reasons. They're here to learn, to share their culture, to learn more about ours, and contribute their talents to America. Indeed, I've come to believe that America's higher education community is really the crown jewels of what we have to offer as Americans to the world, and indeed represent an important element of our soft power. When people come study here in the United States and return to their home countries, it inures to their benefit and ours as well, and promotes common understanding of shared values. But as a member of the Intelligence Committee and the Judiciary Committee, I can assure you that the threats that Director Wray talked about were real. We'll explore more of those today. And they're not limited to one country. There are countries, including state sponsors of terrorism, like Iran, who are actively working to steal U.S. technical information or products, to bypass expensive U.S. research and development, and to exploit the student visa program to gain information that will benefit their countries. Just this past March, the Department of Justice indicted 9 Iranian hackers who stole more than 31 terabytes of information totaling more than $3 billion in intellectual property from more than 300 American and foreign universities. You know, we in Congress are intimately involved in financing the operations of the U.S. government, spending a lot of hard-earned taxpayer dollars on important research and development, whether it's weapons systems, other technology that's important to our national security and the like. But if our adversaries can simply steal it, the intellectual property, or acquire the know-how without having to go through that lengthy and expensive process, it's easy to see where they could leapfrog us quickly. In the case of China, that's their plan, by taking advantage of these vulnerabilities in our system. So that's part of what we want to talk about here. Of course, U.S. colleges and universities have long been a mecca for foreign nationals because of the high quality of education, the academic and cultural freedoms that exist in the United States. Currently, more than 1.2 million international students are studying at U.S. colleges and universities. International students help drive our economy. They help drive our research and development and innovation, and there's no doubt in my mind that international students and visiting scholars bring valuable talent and expertise to the United States and American academia. Today's hearing is not about restricting student visas per se. I'm not interested in restricting student visas. Students from across the world are welcome to come and study at our colleges and universities, and I encourage all of them to explore opportunities to do so. But what this hearing is about, and what we should all be concerned about, is the security risks and the theft of intellectual property at our universities. We will hear recommendations from the agencies on how U.S. institutions of higher education can actively protect research and development and other sensitive areas from potential intrusion. We'll hear, for example, from Texas A&M system, Texas University A&M University system, which has been recognized for its excellence in security, and from NAFSA about the value and talent foreign nationals bring to the U.S. educational system. I just want to make the point that I've long been an advocate for providing expanded H-1B visas and other legal visas for foreign students who have special expertise that would benefit the United States. In fact, I think we've long benefited from the brain drain from other countries who've moved here and who've helped us grow our country, make us stronger and prosper. And so this is not about that. This is about the narrow concern, although it is, we don't know exactly how broad it might be, of those who want to exploit our open society and our open university system for their good and to our detriment. And so that's what we want to hear more about today. Before hearing from Senator Durbin, I want to ask unanimous consent for Chairman Grassley's opening statement for this hearing to be included in the record, and it will be done without objection. Let me turn it over to Senator Durbin for any opening remarks he would care to make.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. This hearing was originally entitled 1,000 Talents, China's Campaign to Infiltrate and Exploit U.S. Academia. The name's been changed. But let's be honest, the real focus of this hearing primarily will be Chinese students and scholars in America. That's why I'd hoped that Congresswoman Judy Chu, chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, and the first Chinese American woman to be elected to Congress, would be permitted to testify. The subcommittee refused my request. It's the first time in 2 decades on this committee that that has happened. It's unfortunate. I think that Congresswoman Chu's perspective would have been very important as we consider this matter today. And I ask consent to submit her written testimony into the hearing record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The United States hosts more international students than any other nation, about 1.1 million from all over the world. They total 5% of all students in higher education. They contribute $37 billion a year to our economy. Almost half of them are in the STEM fields, and a third of them are from one country, China. Let me tell you about one of them. Dan Sui arrived in 1958 with a scholarship to Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois. He later recalled, when I got to campus right after Labor Day, I spent the best 3 years of my life. I had for the first time the leisure to wrestle with my Lutheran faith and to think through and make some sense out of my life. After he received his bachelor's degree from Augustana as a star student, he earned his PhD in physics from the University of Chicago. Then he went on to a prolific career at Bell Labs and as a professor of electrical engineering at Princeton University. In 1998, Professor Dan Sui received the Nobel Prize in Physics. He's not alone. As Jill Welch from NAFSA documents in her testimony, international students have made countless valuable contributions to our country. And in 2016 alone, all 6 American winners of the Nobel Prize in Economics and Science were immigrants. Immigrants. As we consider this subject, we cannot forget our nation's long and sad history of discrimination against China. The 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act made it illegal for Chinese workers to come to America and for Chinese nationals to become citizens. The law remained in place for more than 60 years. It was replaced in 1943 by a discriminatory quota that allowed only 105 Chinese immigrants a year into the United States. Not until the Immigration Act of 1965 did we finally end this legalized discrimination against Chinese immigrants. In 2012, the United States Congress formally apologized for the Chinese Exclusion Act in a resolution authored by Senator Dianne Feinstein of this committee and Congressman Chu. We must, of course, be vigilant to ensure that our adversaries do not abuse our open higher education system for any purpose, including espionage. Today we're going to hear testimony about the thorough vetting system that is in place to screen international students and scholars. Existing law provides the administration ample legal authority to reject any foreign national from any country who seeks to enter the United States to engage in espionage or unlawful activity. To the extent that the government and the higher education community can do more to prevent our nation from being harmed by foreign government, let's join in that conversation. And while some in the administration are still in denial, let's make sure we include in this discussion Russia, the only foreign government known to have attacked our democracy in recent years. But we must also not allow the wrongdoing of a few individuals to cast a shadow over any group of international students. This requires striking a careful balance, taking prudent measures to protect our national security, and also maintaining an open environment that has made ours the best higher education system in the world. Unfortunately, this administration is not known for nuance when it comes to immigration. Instead, they pursued overly broad and ineffective measures like a travel ban targeting Muslim countries, an executive order making 8 million immigrants priorities for deportation, and repealing DACA protections for 800,000 young immigrants who grew up in this country. These policies squander limited resources on millions who pose no threat to us and divert attention from true security threats. The actions by this administration have sent a clear message around the world to international students that they're no longer welcome here. Don't take my word for it. Indeed, we've seen new foreign student enrollment drop by 3% during this academic year, and that decline is projected to double next year. In fiscal year 2017, the United States issued a total of 393,573 student visas, down from 471,728 in 2016. At the same time, universities in other countries are seeing double-digit increases in foreign students. These trends are a threat to the preeminence of our higher education system and our economic competitiveness. They don't make us safer. I look forward to today's hearing and from the witnesses who will enlighten us.
It's my pleasure to introduce the witnesses on the first panel. The first is Mr. Joseph Morosco. Mr. Morosco is currently the Assistant Director of the Office of National Intelligence Manager for Counterintelligence at the National Counterintelligence and Security Center. Before joining the National Counterintelligence and Security Center, Mr. Morosco served in a number of positions at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, including the National Intelligence Council, where he led intelligence community analysis on a broad array of military, security, and transnational issues. Next is Bill Priestap. Mr. Priestap is the Assistant Director of the Counterintelligence Division at the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He started his career in the FBI in 1998, worked organized crime and drug matters in the Chicago Division, your hometown, Senator Durbin. In 2012, Mr. Priestap was promoted to Section Chief in the Counterintelligence Division at FBI and later named Special Agent in charge of the Counterintelligence Division of the New York Field Office. Our third witness is Mr. Edward Ramotowski. Did I get that right? Okay. With a name like Cornyn, you're kind of sensitive to the way people pronounce your name. Mr. Ramotowski is currently the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Visa Services at the Bureau of Consular Affairs at the State Department. In this position, he oversees the visa office in Washington, D.C., 2 domestic processing centers, as well as visa operations at more than 200 U.S. embassies and consulates abroad. Our final witness on this panel is Mr. Louis Rohde. Mr. Rohde is currently Deputy Assistant Director for National Security Program within the National Security Investigations Division at ICE. Mr. Rohde started his federal career with the U.S. Navy as an intelligence specialist and has had a distinguished career in various commands. He has a Master of Arts degree in International Studies from the University of Miami and a Bachelor of Science degree in Political Science from Southern Connecticut State University. Thank you all for appearing here today. And Mr. Morosco, we will start with you with any opening statement you'd care to make, and then I'm told I need to swear you in. If you'd stand and raise your right hand. You swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give before the committee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Now, Mr. Morosco, if you have any opening statement you'd care to make, please proceed.
Chairman Cornyn, Ranking Member Durbin, and members of the Subcommittee on Border Security and Immigration, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss efforts by our global adversaries to exploit U.S. academic institutions to gain access to sensitive information and technology. As an assistant director at the National Counterintelligence and Security Center, I support the NCSC director and the director of national intelligence on a range of national counterintelligence issues. Our mission includes enhancing strategic awareness and outreach regarding the threat posed by foreign academics and researchers in the United States who are seeking to acquire sensitive information and technology to the detriment of our national and economic security. Indeed, we believe that our universities and national laboratories have been victims of this sort of activity for some time. Protecting our national security while maintaining a free and open academic environment is a difficult challenge. Although there are many benefits that international students bring to the United States, we must be clear-eyed about the potential risks. There are many foreign academics and researchers currently attending U.S. institutions from nations that are strategic competitors, including Iran, Russia, and the People's Republic of China. We are particularly concerned about China because it is among the United States' most formidable economic competitors. For some time, Beijing has articulated its industrial policies and long-term technology acquisition objectives through comprehensive national development plans, such as its 5-year plans and its Made in China 2025 initiative. In these plans, Beijing has shown that it is interested in acquiring technology and expertise that is of critical economic and national security importance to the United States. In its recent 5-year plan, Beijing identified its most critical technology priorities, including clean energy, aerospace and deep-sea research, information technology, and manufacturing. Foreign governments often use every means at their disposal to secure an advantage in technological areas, and their exploitation of academics and researchers at U.S. universities, our national labs, and other academic institutions is but one of those means. For example, in addition to leveraging academics and researchers, Beijing also uses its intelligence services, foreign direct investments, joint ventures, open source science and technology acquisition programs, front companies, and scientific and business collaborations to acquire and transfer critical U.S. technology. Beijing also runs a talent recruitment program focused on recruiting global experts, particularly from the United States, who facilitate the transfer of foreign technology, intellectual property, and know-how to further China's science, technology, and military goals. While there are many foreign students in the United States, most do not have access to sensitive information and technology. However, we are most concerned about foreign academics and researchers in advanced programs at our universities and national laboratories who have access to and are seeking to acquire sensitive information and technology that is important to U.S. national economic security now and potentially in the future. To address these concerns, NCSC has informed and advised decision makers about the risks to our security posed by foreign academics and researchers in the United States. We have issued strategic guidance to our federal partners to focus our government's analysis, collection, and counterintelligence activities to advance our understanding of the nature and extent of the threat. Working closely with the Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Defense Security Service, and other federal partners, NCSC is engaging with research funding agencies and academic institutions to strengthen their counterintelligence and security programs and identify research and technology that needs to be protected from exploitation by our adversaries. In fulfilling our obligation to protect our nation's sensitive information and technology, NCSC, as part of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, is committed to upholding academic freedom and preserving the civil liberties of U.S. citizens. As the NCSC director has recently stated, our economic security is our national security. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to appear before the subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Morosco. Mr. Priestap.
Chairman Cornyn, Ranking Member Durbin, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you. My statement for the record has been submitted, and so rather than restating it, I'd like to briefly explain why the issue before us is so important. The United States is the world's sole superpower and single largest economy. One of the key contributors to this primacy is American ingenuity. In fact, I'd argue that this ingenuity is America's biggest competitive advantage. However, our prosperity and place in the world are at risk. And they're at risk because our innovators and innovations are being aggressively exploited by foreign adversaries. Today, our adversaries no longer just rely on their intelligence services to conduct their collection, nor do they only focus on obtaining fully formed ideas and finished technologies. Instead, they leverage people from all walks of life, including scholars and students, to illegitimately exploit and procure at all stages along the U.S. research and development continuum. An esteemed academic once told me that most professors are drawn to teaching in the hopes of sharing knowledge for the good of mankind. This is a wonderful sentiment, to enhance existing understanding and then share it so that others may do likewise. Unfortunately, though, some people and nations don't share this sentiment and instead abuse our open and collaborative academic environment to take what isn't theirs, thereby disadvantaging those who make breakthrough discoveries, as well as the institutions and organizations who fund their research. And this exploitation not only negatively impacts academia, it damages our economy and critically impedes our military as well. The economic costs associated with this type of activity are enormous, costing taxpayer dollars and jobs. Likewise, compromise of cutting-edge research and technologies erodes our national security capabilities and advantages. The mission of the FBI's Counterintelligence Division is to protect America's vital assets from foreign adversaries. These vital assets include college and university scholars and their research. Difficult though it may be, more must be done to protect academics and their discoveries while maintaining open and collaborative environments which enable innovation to thrive. Striking this balance between protection and openness is challenging, yet absolutely essential. In closing, thank you very much for holding today's hearing, as doing so raises awareness and generates productive discussion about how to address this important threat.
Thank you very much. Mr. Remetowski.
Thank you, Chairman Cornyn, Ranking Member Durbin, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify on this important national security issue. We share the concerns expressed by the subcommittee and by our interagency partners regarding the potential for a limited number of foreign government-directed international students and scholars to engage in non-traditional collection of sensitive technology and information. We have no higher priority than the safety and security of our fellow citizens, and we are fully dedicated to the protection of our borders from threats such as the ones discussed here today. The United States is a global leader in international scholarly exchange. Our leadership greatly benefits our academic community. It drives innovation at home, contributes to jobs and economic growth in all 50 states, and strengthens our connections and channels of international influence. More than a dozen current heads of state are U.S. educated, and thousands of cabinet officials, legislative leaders, captains of industry in countries around the world have forged beneficial and lasting ties with Americans through study in the United States. We are proud of this legacy as we strive to facilitate legitimate travel to our country while protecting against those who would do us harm. The President detailed in his December 2017 National Security Strategy that other countries, including China, have repeatedly engaged in efforts to acquire sensitive and proprietary technologies in order to fill capability gaps and erode America's long-term competitive advantages. Although these actions can have serious consequences, some of this transfer of information and knowledge may be legal under today's export control laws. We believe that export control laws and regulations should be continuously reviewed and updated to ensure that new and innovative U.S. technologies are properly protected. We work closely with partner agencies to identify and define new threats and applicants of concern, including those who seek to work or study in sensitive fields that are subject to U.S. export controls. As part of this effort, the Department has developed, implemented, and refined an intensive visa application and screening system. Our current process includes personal interviews, which employ analytic interview techniques, multiple biographic and biometric checks, and interagency review. No visa can be issued unless all relevant concerns raised during this process are fully resolved. Consular officers also employ a variety of statutory tools to adjudicate visa applications. Under the law that applies to most non-immigrant visas, if the consular officer believes an applicant may fail to abide by the requirements of the visa category, including by engaging in impermissible activities or remaining in the United States after the end of their authorized stay, the application will be refused under Section 214B of the Immigration and Nationality Act. Consular officers also assess all visa applicants' eligibility under the security-related grounds of the Immigration Act. For example, the consular officer considers whether there are reasonable grounds to believe that a visa applicant seeks to enter the United States to engage solely, principally, or incidentally in activity to violate or evade U.S. law that prohibits the export of certain sensitive goods or technology. And consular officers have detailed guidance on how to process cases that present potential proliferation or export control concerns. The Department of State also has broad authority to revoke visas, and we use that authority widely to protect our borders. Since individuals' circumstances can change over time, and people who once posed no threat to the United States can later become a threat, continuous vetting and revocation authority are valuable tools. As part of our long-term strategic planning to improve efficiency and accuracy in visa adjudications, we are investigating the applicability of advanced technologies in data analytics, risk screening, and credibility assessment. Investing in these high-tech solutions would give us more robust capabilities to help identify trends and reduce security threats, while keeping the United States open for business and academic study. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I assure you that we are dedicated to maintaining our vigilance and strengthening the measures we take to protect the American public, as well as to protect sensitive and proprietary American technology. At the same time, we also recognize that overreaching restrictions on foreign students at our world-class universities would challenge U.S. leadership and erode U.S. dominance in attracting the best and the brightest. We look forward to working with you in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rohde?
Chairman Cornyn, Ranking Member Durbin, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the efforts of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, and address our initiatives to maintain student visa integrity. ICE HSI administers the Student and Exchange Visitor Program, CVIP, and oversees various investigative programs, including the Visa Security Program, counterproliferation investigations, and overstay enforcement to safeguard against national security and public safety concerns. These programs aim to foster a free and open academic environment while protecting national security. CVIP provides approval and oversight to schools authorized to enroll non-immigrant students in the United States and monitors international students for compliance with the program's requirement. As part of CVIP's certification process, schools must submit evidence with their applications. In addition, they are subject to both announced and unannounced site visits, out-of-cycle reviews, and in some cases, criminal and/or administrative investigations. Before students enter the United States, HSI leverages resources through the Visa Security Program, or VSP, both in the United States and abroad to screen and vet visa applicants by identifying and preventing the travel of those who constitute potential national security or public safety concerns, and launching investigations into transnational criminal and terrorist-affiliated networks operating around the globe. VSP also has a dedicated team of agents and analysts responsible for conducting more intensive reviews of visa applications worldwide that are considered high risk for the applicant's potential involvement in the unlawful procurement, transfer, or export of sensitive information and technology. HSI is also the lead agency for counter-proliferation investigations, which focus on individuals, companies, and networks engaged in the unlawful procurement, transfer, or export of sensitive U.S. origin military or dual-use goods or technology. Such investigations often intersect with the counterintelligence or counterespionage efforts of our law enforcement and intelligence community partners. One reason why the Export Enforcement Coordination Center was established in 2011. Through this coordination, HSI has maintained the balance between traditional law enforcement, resulting in arrests, indictments, and convictions, with the need for intelligence-driven operations, which often have a very different outcome. HSI also actively identifies and initiates enforcement action on overstay violators who pose a national security or public safety concern. As part of HSI overstay enforcement, HSI partners with the National Counterterrorism Center, NCTC, to screen overstays and identify potential matches to derogatory intelligence community holdings. Through that partnership, HSI executes the Recurrent Student Vetting Program, which utilizes the NCTC's resources to routinely screen non-immigrant students who are lawfully present in the United States against known derogatory information. In addition, HSI developed a program to address a potential vulnerability with non-immigrant students who enter the United States to study in a non-sensitive field of study and subsequently transfer to a sensitive field of study. These individuals could pose a substantial risk related to the diversion of sensitive technology, materials, or information. The program works by identifying students that have changed their field of study to a sensitive area and equips agents to send leads to the field for further investigation. HSI also has a robust outreach initiative encompassing all of the aforementioned programs. HSI special agents and CFIB field representatives conduct outreach visits to CFIB certified institutions as part of HSI's Project Campus Sentinel program to afford all stakeholders the opportunity to openly exchange information, improve cooperation, and bolster the safety and security of students, faculty, and institutions. These outreach efforts are further augmented by Project Shield America presentations by special agents assigned to counter-proliferation investigations, which helps educate academia and industry on U.S. export laws and protect controlled technology from falling into the wrong hands. In closing, HSI remains committed to maintaining a free and open academic environment while protecting the security of the nation. HSI will continue to work with academia, law enforcement partners, and other interagency partners to pursue individuals or organizations who seek to harm the United States. Enhancements and expansions of the programs I discussed today will improve our ability to identify those individuals who violate their status or pose national security or public safety concerns to the United States. ICE looks forward to working with the committee regarding these HSI programs. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today and for your continued support of ICE and its law enforcement mission. I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you. We'll do a round of questions, and it looks like due to conflicting engagements, we don't have a whole bunch of senators here at the hearing, so we'll be very flexible in terms of the time for each of the senators in the rounds. Let me ask you, Mr. Morosco, maybe you're Mr. Priestap, comment on this too. I think Senator Durbin raised a legitimate issue of why we are focused on China, but isn't it true that China contributes about 350,000 foreign students to the United States, whereas, let's say, Russia has about 5,400. In other words, because we're talking about a huge country with a huge population and a large foreign student population versus Russia, which is decidedly smaller, obviously China pops to the top of the list. I would also ask you to comment, the second largest foreign student population is from India, but clearly India is not an authoritarian country. It's a country that has a tradition of adhering to the rule of law and is an open society, an open democratic society, whereas China is topped by the Communist Party and is there's hardly any distinction between the public and the private sector. So What is it about China in particular, Mr. Morosco and Mr. Priestap, do you feel that makes this such a concern? Although I think you've made clear it's not just one country. There are a number of countries that pose this concern.
Senator, thank you for the question. Let me be clear. Our counterintelligence concern with respect to China is not driven by race or ethnicity of the students that are in the United States. Our counterintelligence concern is driven by the fact that China has a publicly stated policy goal of acquiring sensitive information and technology around the world, to include here in the United States, and that they seek access and recruit global experts, regardless of their nationality, to meet their science and technology aims.
And where is that publicly stated? Is that the Made in China 2025 strategy?
Sir, yes, it is, and as well as in their 1,000 Talents program.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Priestap?
Senator, I would add that the FBI, when it comes to our investigative efforts, that we do not focus because of on anybody because of their ethnicity or national origin. What we focus on is activity. And for, I think, some of the reasons that Mr. Morosco mentioned, a disproportionate number of what I refer to as our economic espionage cases happen to be on Chinese citizens. But again, for the reasons that Mr. Morosco mentioned.
Mr. Ramatowski, let me ask you, maybe you'd be the most appropriate person, Mr. Rohde. Is this primarily a concern at the undergraduate level or at the graduate level, or is there any distinction between where you would most likely find a concern? Obviously, undergraduate students, if they're studying basic curricula, it would seem to be they would be in one category. If they're studying nuclear physics in a graduate program, maybe another.
Mr. Chairman, that's exactly correct. Let me just emphasize, too, that in our enforcement of immigration laws and visa regulations, those are not nationality specific either, and we are applying the immigration law equally in every country. But you're quite right. Certain categories present greater risks. Undergraduates in general present, and I would defer to my colleague, a lesser risk than do graduates and postdoctoral researchers.
Mr. Rohde, you mentioned in your testimony that a student from a foreign country can get acceptance, get a visa to study in an American university or college, saying, let's say, they want to major in English. But can they transfer to that curricula in nuclear physics without notifying either the State Department or the Immigration Services?
Yes, they can, and that's the vulnerability that we are addressing with our program. So if a student does transfer from a non-sensitive to a sensitive, that has been a loophole in the process that can be exploited. So we developed this program to identify just that. Due to resources, we are focusing specifically on graduate level students who are engaged in that type of activity, and we're also looking at the bigger major universities that are involved in research, as well as universities that are accepting public and private funding.
Mr. Priestap, I know and Mr. Morosco, you're aware of other things that the U.S. government is doing, for example, in modernization of the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States to deal with filling gaps that are currently being exploited by other countries, primarily China, to acquire intellectual property, to acquire know-how that they can use to develop these products in China to our detriment economically and from a national security standpoint. I would note that my partner on the CFIUS reform, the Committee on Foreign Investment Reform, is Senator Feinstein, who, like me, serves on both the Judiciary and Senate Intelligence Committee. She's a former chair of the Intelligence Committee. Are there also, would you explain on the continuum of things we need to be doing? I know we're just talking about student visas here, but are there other vulnerabilities when it comes to foreign investment in the United States, or perhaps sensitive technology that's being exported to other countries overseas that can undermine our technical advantage when it comes to dual-use technology? Mr. Morosco, maybe first. Mr. Priestap.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. Sir, as we mentioned, China uses a range of means to target our sensitive information and technology. One of those is the foreign direct investments and joint ventures and mergers and acquisitions that it has, not just here in the United States, but around the world. We would welcome the continued review of CFIUS legislation, as well as our export control laws, to make sure that they are consistent with the threat activity that we're seeing today.
Mr. Priestap.
One simple thing that I'd add, and it goes to what you're doing here today, and it is raising awareness of these issues. And I said in my opening statement, one of the key contributors to American primacy is our ingenuity. We have such bright minds in so many areas doing a variety of cutting-edge research and development in a variety of fields. When they succeed, that not only benefits them, it benefits their organizations, it benefits whomever is funding them, and it ultimately benefits our economy and our country. Unfortunately, though, there's some other countries, and in my opinion, particularly China, that are trying to exploit that research and development. And so at the end of the day, we've got to do a better job raising awareness to all those bright people, conducting research throughout our country, that what they do is extremely valuable and is worth protecting. It is worth protecting, again, for the good of them, their organizations, and this country.
Just to underline the point that we've all made, that this is not any nation specific. I mentioned the Iranian threat, and certainly I think it would be a concern, wouldn't it, Mr. Rody, Mr. Ramatowski, if an Iranian undergraduate student came in to study English, decided to study ballistic missile technology or nuclear technology or the like. I think the question maybe answers itself. But Mr. Priestap, in your work in the counterintelligence field, can you explain, do our national universities have a special affiliation with our national labs where most of the most sensitive research takes place that develops this cutting-edge technology that's so important that we're talking about here?
Sir, it's my understanding that some of our universities do have those relationships with certain of our national labs. But if I may broaden the issue, and this is simply my opinion, but it isn't just the most cutting-edge research being done, let's say, for military and national security purposes that is worth protecting. Again, I'd argue America is the sole superpower, but the way we got there, or at least part of the way we got there, is the might of our economy. And so even if the research doesn't relate to, again, military and national security uses, U.S. economic success writ large and our protections, is actually why, in my opinion, we have our protections that we do surrounding intellectual property. Those things are worth protecting. So even if a university doesn't have a relationship with a national lab doing, again, military national security work, if they're doing work that's proprietary in nation because of funding from a U.S. business, for example, I'd argue it's that U.S. business and that academic institution that deserves to benefit from the spoils of that research if it succeeds. So I guess I'll conclude in that the things we need to protect our economic dominance as a country are greater than just national security and military-related research.
And I'll close on this. Mr. Priestap, I believe Director Wray and other leaders at the FBI like you have told members of Congress of your concerns in this space about the threat to us economically from a national security standpoint. And I believe the FBI has been doing everything it can to elevate the debate and the visibility of this issue so that policymakers here in Congress and the American people in general understand it and can prepare for it. I know many in the intelligence community are consulting with academic institutions in my state, in Texas and elsewhere, because many of them are simply unaware and thus unprepared of the nature of the threat. And so the main purpose of this hearing today is to give you, the experts, a chance to help inform the American people and the policymakers on this panel and here in Congress about the nature of the threats so we can engage in the kind of sincere and meaningful debate we need to figure out what the policies are we should enact to protect the American economy and the American national security. And hopefully this will generate a lot of discussion along those lines. Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think we can all concede the obvious. In 40 years, China has gone from ping-pong diplomacy to be a major economic player in the world. It's amazing. It's nothing short of miraculous. When you think of the premise we had 40 years ago that a centralized communist economy was never going to compete with the great American free market. Well, they are competing, and we ought to take them seriously. They are competing worldwide. They have a mercantile vision of the world that we don't share. We're standing on the sidelines, and they're playing between the stripes. And they're playing in virtually every country in the world. That is the reality. And secondly, they are somewhat ruthless in their activities in terms of where they try to gain markets and how they try to gain markets and how they try to gain a competitive advantage. Those are realities that I am not going to argue. I think they are things that we need to be sensitive to regardless of party and regardless of this hearing. But this hearing really focuses on one discrete aspect: student visas, foreign students in the United States. And I would say of all the possible ways of compromising the economic integrity and even the national security integrity of the United States, this is a small category. There's a much larger category of cyber intrusion, which is going on constantly, another category of espionage not involving students, and sadly, there's a category where naive businesses are picking up and moving their technology to China to make a buck and find out in a few years they're being invited to leave, but their technology is going to stay. That's the reality of the world that we live in. But today we're talking about student visas, and I want to try to zero in if I can. I assume the agencies represented here, from Homeland Security to the FBI to our intelligence agencies, are in some form of communication about this threat, trying to identify where you think there are vulnerabilities. Is that a fair conclusion? Does you all right? I was hoping you'd say yes. Otherwise, we have another hearing coming. The second point I want to go is to Mr. Ramatowski. It seems to me that unlike most visitors to the United States, when it comes to student visas, it isn't automatic. Being accepted at a university in the United States is not enough. You have to go through what you have described as a pretty thorough background check before you're allowed to come to this country and be a student. And in fact, you went through a long list of things, biometric measurements and so forth and so on, and talked about new technology giving you new opportunities to ask questions and the like. Then you went on to say of those who were allowed to come to this country, I believe your testimony indicates that some 100,000 have had their visas revoked once they've been in this country since 2005, that number. So they're here with permission, and it's a permission which is discretionary, which we can remove based on their activity. Am I correct so far?
Yes, you're correct, Senator.
Good. So when it comes to the actual activities of these students, once they've cleared this hurdle and once they have this renewable temporary approval to come into the United States, the next question Mr. Morosco raises is their access as students to things that are important to us. Mr. Morosco, let me stick with you for a second on this. We have some great national labs in Illinois, Fermi, Argonne National Lab. And I would just go out on a limb here with not having asked them directly, that before they would allow any student, let alone a foreign student, to get into an area of sensitive information, particularly if it relates to national security, but even beyond, they're going to take care to make sure that they are protecting the integrity of that information. Is that correct?
Senator, thank you for the question. I can't comment in this hearing regarding the security protections that the national labs take with regard to protecting their sensitive information.
But stick with me for a minute. You don't argue with the premise here that when we're talking about national laboratories of the federal government, there are standards of security and access that apply to every one of them. Is that not true?
I would believe that's true, sir.
I'm sure it's true. And everyone that I've visited carefully checks my identity and puts me through at least some basic security questions. So this argument that these students would have access to our national labs, to me, it stopped me cold. I can't imagine a foreign student walking into the Argonne National Laboratory with access to everything in sight. It just doesn't make sense.
So, Senator, thank you. I think one of the concerns, as Mr. Priestap noted here, is about threat awareness and outreach, and educating our partners about all of the different ways that our labs and our universities are being targeted.
And are you sharing that with the labs, with the universities? Do they know this?
So, sir, we at ODNI do have engagement with the labs on these matters, as well as with I would say, a representative sample size of the universities to ensure that they are aware of these threats, consistent with our threat awareness and outreach mission.
We work hard as senators, Texas, Illinois, Connecticut, Hawaii, and beyond, to try to bring research funds back to our states and state universities and laboratories, because we have a lot of confidence in the way they handle this. I would like to have an assurance from you that you are sharing with these universities and others your concerns about technologies and information that may create a vulnerability. Are you doing that?
Sir, I think this is an area where we are exploring ways to further enhance that sharing going forward. Let me first say that our academic institutions are about openness and collaboration, and they must remain so. But we are in a new era where our adversaries have the intent and capability to target sensitive information and technology that is being researched or produced on our campuses. And in ODNI, we are committed to finding ways, working with our mission partners at the FBI and DHS, to find ways to strengthen that relationship and that outreach to academia going forward.
Well, I want DHS to do its job, to clear these student visas, to make sure that anyone a suspect is not allowed in the United States, and once here, if they've done anything to raise suspicion, they're invited to leave, wherever they're from. And I think our responsibility then is to the universities, national labs, and other sensitive sources that these students may have contact with, to give them a heads up as to areas where we think there's a vulnerability or a sensitivity. That, to me, would be a sensible approach. Can I ask one specific question? And I don't know if anybody in the panel, perhaps Mr. Ramatowski, could respond. News reports have stated under a new policy to take effect on June 11th, Chinese graduate students will be limited to one-year visas if they're studying in certain fields such as robotics, aviation, and high-tech manufacturing. Is that true?
Senator, we have issued some additional screening instructions to U.S. embassies and consulates to deal with certain individuals from China studying in certain sensitive fields. It would not be appropriate to discuss the details of those internal instructions in an open hearing, but what I can tell you is that these are screening measures. They don't, in and of themselves, prohibit the entry of anyone into the United States or restrict access to our country. It's
Do they limit? Is it a one-year limit?
There would, in some cases, the visa, if approved, might be limited to 1 year, multiple entries with the option to renew.
It's my understanding this just applies to Chinese graduate students. Is that correct?
It applies to certain Chinese nationals, yes, sir.
So how will you ensure that students who do not pose a threat are not punished simply because they happen to be Chinese?
The instructions are very detailed and apply to certain individuals seeking to study or work in certain sensitive fields, sir. So Chinese students and others who don't meet those parameters are not going to be affected by them.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Quickly, a follow-up. Are there also similar provisions that apply to Russia, foreign students, and also nationals of state sponsors of terrorism, Mr. Ramatowski?
the counter-proliferation guidance?
The guidelines that you were just discussing with Senator
Yes,
Durbin.
those particular guidelines that will take effect on the 11th of June are focused on China only, but there have been longstanding requirements to review nationals from any country if they present export control or proliferation concerns.
Thank
So it's not limited by nationality there.
Thank you. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to have submitted for the record the statement of the Asian Americans Advancing Justice regarding this hearing.
Without objection.
Thank you. Now, it seems to me that we already have tools and procedures in place to reduce security threats from foreign students. That's what your testimony indicates to me. Is that correct? Now, Senator Cruz has introduced, you're nodding your heads, that's not recorded, so I'm going to say you kind of nodded your heads. We already have the tools. Senator Cruz has introduced a bill that would require our academic institutions to do things such as, require strict reporting and disclosure rules, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that's necessary if, as you just acknowledged, that we already have the tools to reduce security threats from foreign students? Two of you have not taken a position on the Cruz bill, but I'm asking you, do we need more? Do we need the Cruz bill to do your jobs, to make sure that these students are not coming willy-nilly into our country to steal our secrets? You're just staring at me.
Senator, I'm sorry, from the FBI's standpoint, I'm sorry, I can't comment on, I'd have to defer to my Department of Justice brethren in regards to pending legislation. I would just say from my viewpoint, yes, we have tools, but as I mentioned in response to a previous question, I think there's got to be a greater awareness when it comes to the sensitive research being conducted in this country and our obligations to protect that.
So I do acknowledge, do the rest of the panel members agree that, yes, we do need to make our institutions of higher learning aware of the threats that certain students may pose? So that's really important, and I echo my colleague, Senator Durbin's perspective on that score. So I hope you all are doing all that you can. But do we need another law? Do we need more stuff to enable you to do your jobs? Well, since nobody is piping in, I have to conclude that we don't. So I just wanted to note that I heard from the University of Hawaii, which does have a number of students from China, and there is this one-year visas, and apparently they also are required to engage in secondary administrative checks on top of what the University of Hawaii acknowledges as already rigorous vetting. And so of the hundreds of thousands of Chinese students who come to the United States to study, majority of them probably are not the ones posing these kinds of security risks, but by imposing additional requirements, I think we could see the results that they can study. They can go to Canada, Australia, the UK. When we're talking about an institution like the University of Hawaii, which is right in there, very close proximity, there are a lot of Asian students who come, I think certain kinds of policies telegraph the unwelcomeness of our institutions of higher learning for students from these areas. And of course, that would have an impact on tuition dollars. There's a loss of global diversity on campus, loss of talent for research institutions, loss of collaborative partnerships between U.S. schools and their Chinese partner institutions. So, there are all kinds of ramifications to targeting Chinese students, and I just want to note those concerns for the record, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Are you targeting Chinese students? I thought the testimony was this was not nation-specific.
The one-year requirement for the one-year limitation of visas is on Chinese students.
Well, there were other proposals that applied to state sponsors of terrorism and Russia as well, is what I heard, but I guess, is that correct, Mr. Ramatowski?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman, and if I may comment, we share the senator's concerns about sending the wrong message to legitimate students and other travelers who might be considering whether to attend higher education in this country. We invest a lot of time and effort in outreach efforts, both here in the U.S. and from our embassies and consulates abroad, to educate potential foreign students to opportunities in this country. We work very hard to make the visa process as efficient as possible. We give priority visa appointments to foreign students because we know that they are time limited and need to get to class on time. So even in our busiest mission, and China is our busiest visa operation anywhere in the world, we give those priority appointments because they are a priority for us. And any additional checks that need to be conducted, we strive to do that as efficiently and quickly as possible while maintaining national security.
Thank you. I just have one more follow-up question, then I'll recognize Senator Durbin. And just, Mr. Rhodey, let me just to clarify again. Once a student is admitted into the United States under a student visa, do you have any authority to terminate their visa once they're here?
The only authority we have are the laws that are available to us if the person violates their status. What we have in place for additional vetting of students is we have the recurrent student vetting program that concurrently vets students while they're in the United States. So their entire time, as long as they're in status, they're going through a recurrent vetting process, which includes both the DHS holdings, law enforcement holdings, as well as classified holdings on a semi-annual basis as well. These students will remain in this vetting process until they finish their course of study and return to their home countries, or if they violate their status in any way, shape, or form.
So the main way you would violate your status as a foreign student by overstaying your visa, or
By overstaying their visa or violating the conditions of admission, they commit a crime while they're here, so to speak.
so as long as you don't overstay your visa, don't commit a crime, there's nothing you can do to terminate their visa once they're here. You do additional vetting. Is that
Right.
correct?
As long as they're in an active status, as long as they're continuing in their program, yes, that's correct.
And just to reiterate, they're changing their course of study from humanities to a sensitive science topic. You can't terminate for that, right?
No,
And nobody's under any obligation to report to you that they've done that.
that's correct.
Thank you. We'll have some more conversation about that. Senator Durbin.
It goes beyond that, Mr. Rhodey, doesn't it? Students have to report change of address.
That's correct, they
And
do.
if the students are involved in anything involving national security, such as espionage, even if it doesn't result in a charge of a crime, they could lose their status.
That's correct.
Mr. Ramatowski, I'm going to try one more time to get this clear. June 11th, new standard. If you are a Chinese graduate student, you are limited to a one-year visa in certain fields. I mentioned several: robotics, aviation, high-tech manufacturing. True or false?
Senator, yes, we do have new guidance on that applies enhanced screening to Chinese citizens in certain highly sensitive fields that have been recommended to us by other government agencies.
And that particular June 11th new standard is strictly for Chinese graduate students.
And certain other individuals of Chinese nationality that might be engaged in this similar study or work.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank the witnesses for your participation, your response to our questions. You may get some follow-up questions from the committee in writing, so appreciate your prompt response to those, but we're grateful for your service to our country and for your testimony here today. It's been very helpful. Thank you. We'd like to call the next panel. As soon as the current panel is able to clear their seat. Very important witnesses. It's now my pleasure to introduce our second panel. The first witness is Dr. Kevin Gamache. Dr. Gamache is currently the Chief Research Security Officer at Texas A&M University System. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Gamache recently when Texas A&M was awarded the 2017 Defense Security Service Award for Excellence in Counterintelligence. Texas A&M was just one of 2 facilities to receive this award that recognizes those contractors who best demonstrate the ability to stop theft of U.S. defense and national security technology. The Defense Security Service also recognized the A&M system with the 2015 Colonel James S. Cogwell's Outstanding Industrial Security Achievement Award as one of the 41 from more than 13,000 defense contractors subject to recurring security assessments. This award recognizes those security programs that far exceed basic requirements and provide leadership to other cleared facilities in establishing best practices while maintaining the highest standards for security. So, Dr. Gamache, we're glad to have you here today, and I hope your testimony helps inform and other university systems about what they need to do to up their game when it comes to their security systems. Our next witness is Ms. Jill Welsh, who currently serves as the Deputy Executive Director for Public Policy at NAFSA. Ms. Welsh leads a team of talented staff in promoting international education. She holds an Executive Leadership MPA from American University and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and French from Berry College. Our last witness today is Mr. Leon Rodriguez. Mr. Rodriguez is a partner at the Seafarth Shaw LLP. Prior to his current position, he served as Director for U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services from July 2014 to January 2017. During his tenure, Mr. Rodriguez helped the agency implement President Obama's executive actions on immigration. He also helped to develop and implement the Central American Miners Program to address the humanitarian challenge of the Northern Triangle of Central America. So I want to thank each of you for appearing here today. So, Dr. Gamache, let's begin with you, please, if you have some opening remarks you'd care to make.
Okay. Chairman Cornyn, Ranking Member Durbin, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I'm the Chief Research Security Officer for the Texas A&M University System and come today to discuss the unique challenges universities face protecting the nation's cutting-edge technology and national security in the open environment of academia. With over 3 decades of experience protecting our national security, first as an Air Force nuclear maintenance officer, in my current position for 12 years, and as an adjunct faculty member, I'm glad to have the opportunity to bring these perspectives to this important issue. The A&M system is one of the largest systems of higher education in the nation, with 11 universities and 7 state agencies representing more than 152,000 students and $972 million in research expenditures. Our flagship is proud to be the choice of international students from 127 countries. More than 3,800 students, the most of any public university in the United States, participate in international study opportunities every year. We have a global network of faculty who contribute to our research, teaching, and scholarship missions. We currently have 275 international agreements with 60 countries. We have been a cleared defense contractor for both DoD and DOE since 1974 and have amassed 6 straight superior ratings during Defense Security Service vulnerability assessments. We have received 2 prestigious DSS awards for excellence in security management and counterintelligence. And I tell you this to establish our credibility as an organization dedicated to protecting sensitive information in an environment dedicated to research. U.S. universities are primary destinations for significant numbers of international students because of our strong academic programs, particularly in STEM fields. This global engagement facilitates basic research collaboration and provides U.S. industry with much-needed talent when these students stay and work here. However, gaining access to U.S. universities involved in sensitive and critical defense-related research also allows our adversaries to bridge gaps in their current technical knowledge. Capitalizing on U.S. research investments enables them to leapfrog the U.S. in innovation and can pose a threat to U.S. national security. Universities are increasingly vigilant about securing research programs and ensuring compliance with rules relating to export controls, controlled unclassified information, and classified information. The A&M system has taken a leadership role in this area. We established the Academic Security Conference in 2017 as a forum for academic institutions participating in the National Industrial Security Program. We also managed a listserv with 120 universities for academic security professionals to collaborate daily. Finally, we established the Academic Counter-Exploitation Program, a secure portal on DHS's Homeland Security Information Network to allow academic institutions to share controlled unclassified threat information unique to academia. Many others within the academic community also work diligently to protect our nation's high-value research, but more can be done. We recommend establishing an academic counter-exploitation working group to work with the FBI, DSS, and other agencies to help inform policy solutions to counter the foreign threat to sensitive academic research. This group could also establish a national initiative to educate faculty and university administration on threats to our research and innovation base. Secondly, fund federal research robustly. Our adversaries' efforts would be less effective if U.S. faculty and students were resourced more fully. If the U.S. government matched funding levels and provided a focus equal to what the Chinese government is contributing to their talent recruitment programs, it would diminish many of these security issues considerably. Having top international scholars in our universities enhances our ability to innovate and create knowledge. This engagement also presents some risks, however. We must partner with federal agencies to mitigate existing and emerging threats, educate our researchers, and provide clear avenues to address security concerns. Doing so will allow the U.S. Academy to continue producing game-changing research and a skilled workforce while ensuring U.S. technological and economic superiority. Thank you for the opportunity to share, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Doctor. Ms. Welsh?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, and distinguished members of the subcommittee and their staff, I want to thank you for the invitation to appear today on behalf of NAFSA. I respectfully request that my prepared remarks and appendices be part of the record.
Certainly, without objection.
Thank you. NAFSA was founded 70 years ago on the principle that international education creates a more secure and peaceful world, leads to a more globally informed, engaged, and welcoming nation, and creates a more responsive, participatory government. We are proud to work with nearly 10,000 individual professionals within higher education to facilitate study abroad by American students and to welcome international students and scholars to our campuses and communities. With a vested interest in the integrity of these programs, we support targeted efforts to ensure a secure and open environment for internationally collaborative study. University and college officials take threats to national security, academic freedom, and economic security very seriously. NAFSA, along with other higher education associations, stands ready to partner with you in these efforts. My testimony provides perspective on the relatively limited scale of the problem being discussed today and the potential unintended consequences associated with overly broad action. Let us remember that we are, in fact, in a global competition for talent, and it is through open collaboration, the influx of international perspectives, and the free exchange of ideas that the United States will prosper in the global economy. Higher education institutions must comply with numerous existing laws and regulations, including ITAR, EAR, OFAC, CVIS, and other federal requirements. The specific processes vary according to the institution, but most go above and beyond, as my fellow witness has indicated, to ensure compliance. All include dedicated staff who oversee the institution's policies on export controls, such as an export control officer or a vice president for research. This is in addition to having dedicated staff to ensure federal immigration regulation compliance. Some institutions require that all foreign nationals undergo a review, regardless of nationalities. Others are more targeted, requiring review only of those who will be involved either in federally funded research or exposed to certain types of technology or technical data that requires the individual to be licensed. For example, a major research institution in the Midwest requires all H-1B faculty and J-1 research scholar applicants to be reviewed for the need for export control licenses. This policy has been in place since DHS in 2011 added an export control attestation question to the H-1B visa application. The institution has taken the additional step to include J-1s to be further vigilant. Before I conclude, I'd like to emphasize how vital it is for our economic and national security for us to remain open and welcoming. Generations of foreign policy and national security leaders have all emphasized the importance of ensuring that whatever measures we put in place, we must not impede our strongest asset of being an open society with equality, freedom, and opportunity for all. We must encourage exchanges in order to engage with the world. National security directives issued first by the Reagan administration during the Cold War and reaffirmed later by the Bush administration in 2001 have established that the best way for our nation to protect ourselves is to encourage free, open research, known as fundamental research, and to distinguish that from the more narrow classification of research results which are restricted for proprietary or national security reasons. In contrast to the rare cases of those who pose threats talked about today, my written testimony includes examples of the contributions Chinese students and scholars are making to our nation. To cite just one example, Nanshu Liu studied at Harvard and now teaches at UT Austin. Dr. Liu's breakthrough development is a wearable electronic tattoo that can measure health data to allow for more accurate monitoring by doctors. She's been recognized as one of 35 innovators under 35, and she was awarded the NSF Career Award. International students and scholars have conducted joint research on flu vaccines, saved lives by redesigning an exit ramp known to cause traffic fatalities, helped prevent spinal bifida, coached community sports leagues, hosted charity events to fight poverty, created hundreds of small businesses that employ Americans, and more. As you consider this important topic, we urge the committee to strive for even more robust educational opportunities while simultaneously ensuring the oversight of existing strong security measures. In the global competition for talent, we cannot afford to make it yet more difficult for students to come here. Thank you for the opportunity to appear. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Welch. Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chairman Cornyn, Ranking Member Durbin, Senator Klobuchar. I very much appreciate being invited here today and to speak both based on my experience now as a business immigration lawyer and my prior experience directing the immigration screening agency for the United States. I don't need to repeat what we heard from Assistant Secretary Ramatoski, from Mr. Rodi, from Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Suffice it to say that they and I, in my written remarks, were able to explain in great detail the existing vetting procedures for immigrants and travelers to the United States, including, and in particular including, student visa holders here in the United States. We have powerful and widely available mechanisms to prevent their entry when we are concerned in some way that they may pose a threat, including an espionage threat. And we also, as Mr. Rodi acknowledged, have tools to remove them from the United States and to disrupt the activities in which they are engaged when, in fact, they are engaged in some sort of illicit activity. And these are tools that are not new, but in fact tools that have existed for a long time. There are two cautions that I would like to share over and above the written remarks that I offered today. First of all, this discussion is not the first time that we are at risk of taking the acts of a few and tarring an entire nationality. I look back on my experience as director of USCIS when, as we sought to offer relief to refugees from Iraq and from Syria, we heard wholesale concerns expressed about individuals from those nationalities. In fact, the vetting and screening procedures that we talked about today were vetting and screening procedures that existed back then. We admitted tens of thousands of Iraqis to the United States, thousands of Syrians, and to date, not a single one of them has engaged in an act of terrorist violence. With respect to the Chinese, this is not the first time that concern has been expressed about Chinese as a whole presenting an espionage threat to the United States. In fact, many times when those concerns have been expressed in the past, the harm that was forecast did not indeed come to pass. And we should be cautious here in any particular solution that we find, in any particular way that we use our existing authorities, to do so in an individualized manner that focuses on the threats where they actually exist, and not instead to end up tarring an entire nationality, particularly where so many Chinese Americans have made the kinds of contributions that we've been hearing about in today's hearing. Director Ray's warnings about intrusion into our institutions of higher learning are warnings to be taken very seriously and to be acted upon. They also mean that we need to make smart choices about the resources that we use. And in so particular here, in echoing Senator Durbin's remarks earlier, we are directing resources or exposing ourselves to the need to direct resources in places where we don't need to. And so, for example, our failure to once and for all solve the situation of the Dreamers, to find a permanent solution to their situation, exposes us to a situation where our deportation machinery, rather than taking those resources, rather than taking it to the money and talking about the threats that we're talking about today, which are very serious threats, will indeed be misallocated to those populations. We have the power right now to do something about that. And when we talk about talent, when we look at that group of individuals, there is in fact exactly the sort of talent, energy, and drive, much of it, by the way, nurtured in our American schools, that in fact needs to now have the ability to be safely, permanently here on the United States on a path to citizenship. So as we talk about these threats, we need to think about the choices that we are making. Similarly, with those who are here under temporary protected status. So with that, again, thank you for inviting me here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Rodriguez, in your previous capacity, did you have a classified clearance?
Yes, sir, I did.
What level?
Top secret.
Top secret?
Yes, sir.
Not SSCI?
No, I'm sorry, TSSCI, yes, sir.
Yeah, SCI, excuse me, okay. And Ms. Welsh, in your capacity, do you have a security clearance?
No, sir.
Okay. And Dr. Gamache, do you have a security clearance?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. I should ask Mr. Rodriguez, do you currently have that same security clearance?
I do not, sir.
Okay. The reason I ask about that is I had a president of a Texas university come see me yesterday and talk about the longstanding close relationship he's had with the FBI, where they've collaborated on these risks on an ongoing basis. And he told me he thought that academic leaders would benefit from getting briefings at the highest security level possible on the nature of the threat, because we certainly don't want people to conclude that we're talking about one nation or people as a whole, but rather individuals who obviously have malicious intent against the United States. But Dr. Gamache, in your capacity, you talked about convening an academic working group for Tier 1 research universities. Is it your understanding that research universities across the board aren't getting access to the kind of information that they need in order to keep this research, this classified research, secure? Or that they don't have uniform appreciation for the nature of the risk?
I think that would be accurate. We're fortunate to have a very good working relationship with Defense Security Service and our local FBI, and take advantage of every opportunity to interact with them on threat discussions. But I think a a more uniform opportunity across the country to disseminate that information would be very helpful.
Well, I'll just share with you another anecdote. When I had another leader of an academic research institution from Texas come see me, I've said about 6 months ago, and say, Senator, he's a newly installed leader of this academic research facility, and he said, Senator, we've been infiltrated. And I said, what are you talking about? And he then went on to recount a number of instances where scientists working at that institution who apparently had been compromised, including individuals who had gained access to data that they should not have been able to get their hands on, who were arrested at an international airport on their way back to a foreign country. The sorts of things you would expect to read about in spy novels, but would not something you would encounter on a day-to-day basis in working research institutions. In your experience, Dr. Gamache, is this fiction? Is this made up, or is this real?
Senator, my experience tells me this is very real.
And just in the context of, we talked a little bit earlier with the earlier panel about the Made in China 2025 and the other statements by the communist-led leadership in that country about their plans to surpass the United States both economically and militarily. Is this part of a strategic plan that, in particular, China has been very open about?
It is my understanding that it is part of their 5-year plan.
Yeah. Okay. And I just have to conclude, Ms. Welsh, I live in Austin, so when you talked about Dr. Liu, you got my attention, and particularly when you talked about the electronic tattoo that she developed. And I thought, yeah, that sounds like Austin. Be happy to recognize Senator Durbin.
Mr. Rodriguez, thanks for returning. In your new capacity, you have to be on the second panel, but I'm sure there's a relief that comes with that as well. I'd like to ask you, what I heard you say toward the end there, when it came to DACA and Dreamers, and I obviously perked up on that, was the more time we spend focusing on 790,000 or whatever the number is of those who've already been vetted, have already gone through the security clearance, the background checks, criminal background checks, the more time spent on them, the less time that was spent on those who might be problematic in this country, undocumented or otherwise. Is that a fair conclusion?
That's a fair conclusion. I would also add they've been vetted by experience. We're 6 years into the DACA program, and on the whole, it is a population that has clearly represented the best of our country. Hardworking, seeking opportunity, pursuing education. So I think your thoughts there, Senator, are right on.
Well, I can tell you that I go to the floor with color photographs of these dreamers. I've done it 114 times, I believe, somewhere near that, always imagining that tomorrow morning there'll be a story that will show the other side of the story, and I've never run into it. Maybe we're just lucky, but I also think it reflects on the wonderful young people involved, and I wish they were not the target of this administration. I wish we in Congress would do our part. Dr. Gamache, you've received some awards. I think some might have been presented by my colleague here for work that's been done at Texas A&M. You heard the earlier testimony, the concerns of our intelligence agencies that foreign students, particularly Chinese students, may have access to sensitive information, not just national security information, but sensitive information about technology and techniques that may create a commercial advantage at the expense of the United States. Are you familiar with that concern?
I'm familiar with the concern, yes, Senator.
So your school has a lot of foreign students. How do you protect against that possibility?
Certainly we have to prioritize what we are protecting. And one way that we have done that at Texas A&M is to organize so that we have a single office that has oversight for our classified programs, our controlled unclassified programs, and our export control programs. So we are focusing our efforts on protecting those assets rather than on monitoring the individuals.
That's interesting. So instead of tailing the students or following the students, you go right to the source of information? Is that what I hear you say?
Yes, Senator.
That seems sensible. And I would just imagine it'd be the last thing in the world for someone with a student visa to have access to classified information or top secret information. Your institution and virtually every other one would go out of their way, realizing that'd be their last military contract or defense contract if they weren't careful.
Absolutely.
That's the way I see it too. Ms. Welch, how do you explain the downturn in number of foreign students coming to the United States in the last year?
I think there are many contributing factors. For more than a decade, the U.S. has been at risk of losing our edge in terms of the attractiveness of our higher ed institutions in comparison to those growing around the world. There are degrees offered in English all around the world now, even in non-English speaking countries. And other countries are investing in the ability to retain students after graduation in a way that the United States has not yet been successful in doing. And I commend both of you for your work in trying to get more green cards and H-1Bs and the things we need to be sure to retain the talent after they graduate here. Students look at that when they're making their choices. It's also been unhelpful that a lot of the rhetoric coming out of this country and some of the policies have seemed unwelcoming and do risk casting a broad stroke. So in examples of what we're talking about today, it's exceedingly important that the majority of Chinese students and scholars understand that we are not talking about them today. It's exceedingly important because there are many choices of where talented people can go. And our research programs in the United States, particularly at the graduate level, are incredibly dependent on this kind of talent in order to offer the spaces in our classrooms to American students as well. So there are many factors. What we could do about it is primarily more green cards, more research funding.
And the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill, which passed the Senate and did not, was never considered by the House Representatives, included a provision which said if you have a graduate degree in a STEM subject and a job, you automatically get a green card. Stay in the U.S. We don't want you to go back to wherever it was in the world and make them more successful. We want you to make America more successful. Thank you for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. I just for the record, I would just note, according to our research, total federal research and development spending in the fiscal year 2018, omnibus at the highest point ever in inflation adjusted, the United States government is spending $176.8 billion, and that's according to the American Association for the Advancement of Science is where that number came from. At the same time, China is spending $280 billion. And I just need to make sure, perhaps inadvertent, but I think Senator Durbin said that that immigrants that come into this country get a security clearance. I know he meant criminal background check, I think. Yeah, that's what I meant. Okay,
Actually, to be clear, a criminal background check and also a national security background check. In other words, not a security clearance.
Right, that's what I said.
But inquiries are made about. Yeah.
Yeah, and I knew it was probably just inadvertent. So I don't. What wasn't inadvertent is that Senator Durbin talked about Dreamers being targeted by the administration. I would disagree with that, as I have previously with my friend, and say that this administration's made an extraordinarily generous offer to give 1.8 million young adults who came into this country at a tender age with their parents a pathway to citizenship, which hardly seems like targeting them, certainly not in a negative way, maybe in a positive way, but we can't seem to get to yes on that. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Senator Durbin. I just would like to note we did get to yes in our bipartisan Common Sense Caucus with Senator Rounds, actually, Republican from South Dakota, leading the bill, but unfortunately we were not able to get enough votes because the administration came against the proposal. And hopefully we still can, but I have just viewed this as a major issue. And I want to, first of all, thank you for all of your good work. And especially I've worked with you, Mr. Rodriguez. Thank you so much for everything you did. I come from a state where we have 19 Fortune 500 companies, where our unemployment rate is now at 3% or below. We are starting to have to turn away businesses at some of our employers, especially in the rural areas, because we don't have enough employees in ag, or we don't have enough employees at some of our manufacturing firms. And yet we have these students who come in who would like to stay. I personally like the idea of stapling the green card to the diploma and allowing them to stay, because our whole ability to compete in a country that has 25% of our U.S. Nobel laureates born in other countries, 70 of our Fortune 500 companies headed up by immigrants, hundreds headed up by immigrants or kids of immigrants. I see this issue just critical to our success as a country, and that immigration does not diminish who we are as a country. It is who we are as a country. So we have in my state about 11,000 international and foreign-born students that are enrolled in post-secondary institutions each year. And so this matters a lot to us in terms of having more of them come in and continuing this flow of talent. And the most important part is finding a way for them to stay when they get a degree. We don't have enough doctors. I carry the Conrad 30 bill every year, and we've tried to expand that, but we've at least been able to keep it in place, barely, but that allows, of course, people who go to medical school here who are willing to work in underserved areas, include rural areas, to stay for a period of time. So maybe I should start with that. That is one of my priorities, and Chairman Grassley has continued to work with me on this program. It's a bill sponsored with Senator Collins and myself and Senator Heitkamp. Can any of you speak to the value of the Conrad 30 program in addressing physician shortages? Do you know, Mr. Rodriguez?
Yeah, no, it is, I would agree, a program that has provided considerable value in placing or enabling us to place physicians in underserved areas in the country. I don't know that I can speak in detail as far as numbers and where, but that is, I have always understood that program to have delivered that value.
Okay, anyone want to add anything?
If I could just add that I think it's an incredibly valuable program, and any bill that's going to make us more competitive and more welcoming is something that NAFSA can support, as long as it's not at the same time shooting ourselves in the foot in some other way. So we're very appreciative of such an initiative. But I would just also add that it's not just competition from China that we're facing when it comes to retaining our best and brightest. Canada just announced in March that it's recruited 12 of our best academics from our top universities to come there, with the promise of very good funding and very good immigration policies. And so it's not unique to one field, it's all over.
And we know that some of our tech companies have deliberately expanded in Canada because of the fact that they're able to recruit some of this top talent. And I know a little bit about that in Minnesota. While Senator Cornyn may be on one border, we can see Canada from our porch where we are. And so we directly see that. And so you know that international scholars provide U.S. campuses with needed expertise in science, math, and engineering. Do you want to talk just a little bit more about that as we look at this incredible change in robotics? And while that's going to mean some job loss, of course, it is also going to mean more jobs if we have the talent to do the job. And I really see this as a two-prong approach. One is to get our high schools and colleges to get kids to be graduating in degrees and with educations out of high school that prepare them for the jobs we have now. And we're going crazy at our high schools where voters in really conservative areas are passing referendums to expand schools to have more welding equipment and have more technology, and that's great. But I just know that it's not going to fill the short-term need we have right now if we don't complement it with immigration reform at the same time. So do you want to talk about this in terms of the change we're seeing in our economy and the skills we're going to need to be able to compete internationally?
Absolutely. And before I do, I just want to share an example, and I'll have to get back to you about the specifics of which college it is. I seem to recall it's Pima Community College in Arizona. But on the issue of AI and losing jobs, American jobs to artificial intelligence or to robotics, it's both good for the economy and sometimes it can make us regular jobs can be threatened. There are colleges and universities that are very intentionally partnering internationally to replace those jobs with higher skilled jobs and training that workforce for those jobs. So I just lift that up as an example of looking at the changing economy, the nature of how everything is getting so technologically advanced, so global, and some colleges and universities being very intentional about trying to make sure we're creating jobs for Americans along the way. But specifically to your question about STEM, our sciences, particularly at the graduate level, are frankly dependent on the presence of international students and scholars, both in terms of students and also teaching. The fact is we just do not graduate at this time enough students who are competent and interested in the STEM fields through our K through 12 system, and we need to invest more in that and find ways to do that better. But we can't stop welcoming students from abroad while we do that because we just will not compete internationally. So I think you raise a very valid concern, and I do agree that part of the solution is really retaining the talent here. I also think it's about attracting them in the first place. And the little things that we do along the way that we think come at no cost because it's just focused on one small group of people or just a little bit of extra paperwork, and surely they'll want to go through all of this in order to come here. It adds up when no other countries are requiring the same things.
Right, exactly. Does anyone want to add anything?
Yeah, if I may, Senator, I mean, I think both in my role as USCIS director and now in my role representing companies that are trying to attract this talent, really looking at the entire continuum here, access to student visas, access to H-1B visas, we are in a position where we are losing potentially to other developing countries unless we not only maintain the platform we have for attracting that talent, but actually improve that platform. We're talking about student visas, we're talking about H-1Bs, we're talking about permanent visas. We really are in a situation where in order to really meet the potential that our US companies have, we need to be able to keep this pipeline as robust as we can.
Because basically, if you're a company and you're trying to decide where to expand, if you don't have the workers, you can't expand there. It's that simple. So.
That's correct. And look, we've always been about attracting the best and brightest, and this is our mechanism to do exactly that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did, I think, 8 graduations in the last month or two. And there, you have this generation, now I guess Generation Z, but is more diverse and more globally minded than any other generation that we've seen. And so that's what gives me some hope, is that they're going to start up coming through the pipeline and say these policies are crazy. We went to school with all these kids. We want them to be able to stay, and they're going to develop the next Google or the next, pacemaker, and we want them to be in our country doing that because that's how you expand jobs. And I hope that we catch up to where the business community is and to where the next generation is, or we're going to fall behind the rest of the world.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Ms. Welch, I just have one more question for you. Just to remind everybody about your bona fides, remind us what NAFSA is again, please.
NAFSA, the Association of International Educators, it's a professional association of 10,000 members who are based primarily at U.S. universities, some international universities, but most of our membership is in the United States. And they are engaged in the daily work of serving students and scholars. So they are the ones that implement the SEVIS program that was mentioned earlier. It was referred to as SEVP, the government name for the bureau or the office that handles that program. They're also the ones that manage study abroad and make sure our students get global learning opportunities and that we diversify who goes abroad and the destinations to which they go. And Senator Durbin is a champion of the Paul Simon Senator Study Abroad Act, which would help us to make sure Americans are more globally aware, as is Senator Wicker of Mississippi. But it's basically an association that's engaged in this daily work of serving international students. And if I may, I did want to add something to the previous panel about their work in SEVIS.
Well, let me just ask you this. Would you be willing to support a discrete measure, a standalone measure that would provide a green card to STEM graduates from American universities?
I think that if we looked at what it takes to compete, I would never limit that to STEM. While
Well,
STEM,
you would, so you, no, I'm just asking you about STEM. I understand
Right.
you would go broader than that, but if Congress was able to come together and agree on a standalone measure that would staple a green card to a STEM graduate from an American university, to their graduation certificate, would you support that?
we've supported bills like that in the past. It has seemed to be the case that Congress is going to need to pass some sort of comprehensive immigration reform to find agreement
Well,
on
we've
the
tried that for
issues.
years and have not. So you want all or nothing? Is that what you're telling us?
I'm not saying we want all or nothing at all. I'm
Well,
saying
so what
that
I'm
we-
asking
yeah,
you,
yeah.
would you endorse the idea of a standalone bill that would provide a green card to STEM graduates from American universities, if we were able to come together and pass it?
I think it would be amazing to see people come together and pass something that does something positive for our immigration system.
I agree. Well, let me just say in conclusion, we want to keep unemployment low so that there are many more opportunities for Americans and those living in the U.S., and in order to keep the prosperity that Mr. Priestap talked about earlier, which is essential to our national security. I believe to do so, we need to protect our intellectual property, be aware of that our economic security is equivalent to our national security, which is why we held this hearing today, and we're grateful to each of you for participating in the hearing. Thank you so much.